committee hearing.
This is infuriating. I would like to ask my Republican colleagues, why are you so afraid of democracy? Why, instead of trying to win voters over that you lost in the last election, are you trying to prevent them from voting? Our country has come a long way, supposedly, since African Americans in the South were forced to guess the number of jelly beans in a jar in order to vote. But some of these voter suppression laws in Georgia and other Republican states smack of Jim Crow rearing its ugly head once again. It is 160 years since the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments abolished slavery, and Jim Crow still seems to be with us.
It do seem to be with us. It's 2.0, or it's in a new suit, or it's got new cologne, and they're trying to make it smell good, but it's still here. It's still voter suppression, and by any other name, it's Jim Crow. And that's what's happened in Georgia, and it's happening in Iowa. Freaking Iowa, okay? Iowa went for Donald Trump. He freaking won Iowa. Shut up, Iowa. What do you need voter suppression for? It's unbelievable. It's happening in Arizona, Florida, all over the place, with zero evidence of any voter fraud in this country, and with tons of evidence that 2020 was the deadliest gun violence year we've had to date. No gun legislation, none whatsoever. And we all know that when the Second Amendment was put on paper, it was because the founding fathers were afraid of big government taking over, and it had absolutely nothing to do with automatic weapons, semi-automatic weapons. In fact, you had to muster to be part of the militia to protect the free state. You had to muster. You had to show up. You had to have your ammunition in a certain way. You know, we had so many gun laws in this country, and there was no federal objection to any of them. Yeah, it's true. All throughout American history, you can go and read it yourself. We had no federal objection to the laws that regulated who could have what and where it needed to be stored in this country with regard to firearms and ammunition. None. Not until all of a sudden Antonin Scalia came along. Oh yeah, Antonin. We had 5 of the worst years on the Supreme Court during Antonin Scalia's reign of terror. And one of those things that he did was he overturned a decision that had governed us for plenty of years. It was called the Miller decision. And the Miller decision dealt with sawed-off shotguns. It dealt with something other than handguns, okay? It dealt with something other than a musket. It dealt with something other than a weapon that could reasonably be interpreted for use in a well-regulated militia. Sawed-off shotgun had no relationship to the well-regulated militia. And so the Supreme Court, I think it was 1939 or 4, you look it up, it's called the Miller decision, okay, U.S. versus Miller, said, no, Mr. Miller, you cannot have a sawed-off shotgun. It has no relationship to anything that would be used in a well-regulated militia. And that was how we governed ourselves when it came to the Second Amendment. Only members of the militia could own weapons, and only weapons used by the militia or reasonably could be used by the militia were accepted weapons for civilians. A short-barreled shotgun, they said, this is what Miller said, in the absence of any evidence that the possession or use of a shotgun having a barrel of less than 18 inches in length has some reasonable relationship to the preservation or efficiency of a well-regulated militia, we cannot say that the Second Amendment guarantees the right to keep and bear such an instrument. Now, just so you know, we had all kinds of gun laws in this country. Boston, Philly, New York, those were the 3 largest cities in America at that time. And they all had restrictions on the firing of guns in the city limits. Boston had a law as early as 1746 prohibiting the discharge of any gun or pistol. 1778, Philadelphia prohibited firing a gun or setting off fireworks without the governor's special license. Yeah. New York, they banned the firing of guns for 3 days surrounding New Year's Day. Couldn't fire a gun 3 days before, couldn't fire a gun 3 days after. All these cities that these were the populated cities during the writing of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, okay? And by the way, you know, yesterday we had a call from some guy in South Carolina. I know you're just kidding about bullets need to cost big money. Well, I was, because it's a Chris Rock joke that bullets need to cost $6,000 so that you would have to think about whether or not taking the life of that person was worth to you $6,000, right? But actually, the truth is that almost every single city that was part of original America had regulations about the storage of your gunpowder. Yes, Boston's Gunpowder Law, a 10-pound fine on any person who took any loaded firearm into any dwelling, any house, or any barn within the town. We had no problem with the regulation of firearms, and we didn't have a problem with access to the ballot until all of a sudden the South freed the slaves, which didn't happen the way you think it did, by the way, but that they won the right to vote and they started winning elections. Yeah, African Americans got elected to the Senate and stuff. Oh no, what are we going to do? And that's when voting became an issue for Southern whites, and banning and barring and putting impediments in front of African Americans, in front of black people, free black slaves, to the ballot box. Oh, and of course, women couldn't vote till, what, 1920? And, you know, we had to die. We had to starve ourselves. And it took forever for us to win the right to vote, suffragettes and all that. Look that up. And people will still say to me, there is no right to vote, but there is a right to own a gun. It's the exact opposite. There were no federal objections to laws regulating the civilian use of firearms throughout the American history. There were none. Okay? And voting was something people did proudly in this country until all of a sudden black people got the right to vote. And they started to win elections. And the same thing is happening now in Atlanta, okay? The same thing is happening now in Georgia. Why? Well, for starters, African Americans used the conveniences that the Republican legislature and the Republican governor in Georgia passed way back in 2005 to help their elderly rural voters vote. No excuse absentee balloting. And this particular election cycle, people like Stacey Abrams and Latasha, they went out there and they told people, you know, this is available to you in a pandemic. You should use it. And they did. And Biden and his voters in Georgia turned that state blue. That's why this is happening. Don't have time to listen to the live show?